My name is Rachel Whitman, and on March 3, 2017, my life changed forever. I grew up in a quiet town in Kentucky where faith was everything to my family. My parents, Mark and Evelyn Whitman, taught me that prayer was powerful and that God heard every word we spoke. As a child, I believed it without question. Prayer was simple: ask and God answers. But as I got older, something inside me began to shift. I prayed constantly, but the answers never seemed to come. When my mother fell sick, I begged God to heal her, but she only got worse. When our family struggled financially, I prayed for relief, yet the debt only deepened. No matter how much I prayed, life felt like it was getting harder, not easier. I never stopped believing in God, but deep down I started wondering if my prayers actually mattered. Desperate for answers, I tried everything: waking up early to pray, writing my prayers in a journal, even fasting. But no matter what I did, my words felt empty, like they were hitting a ceiling. Eventually, I started praying just to check it off my list, my faith running on autopilot. I felt distant from God, but I didn't know how to fix it. And then, on one ordinary night, everything changed in an instant. The night started like any other. I had just finished my shift at Millie's Diner, exhausted from another long day on my feet. My head was full of thoughts, bills that needed paying, prayers I had half-heartedly whispered that morning, and the overwhelming feeling that nothing in my life was changing. The roads were nearly empty as I turned onto Hollow Creek Road, the familiar drive home. I barely even noticed the time on my dashboard: 9:42 p.m., the last thing I would remember before everything went dark. But I never saw the truck coming. One second I was driving, lost in thought, and the next, a blinding set of headlights filled my vision. There was no time to react, no time to pray. The impact was immediate, violent. Metal twisted, glass shattered, and my body was thrown like a rag doll as the world around me disappeared. And then silence. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel anything. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my car anymore. I wasn't on the road, surrounded by flashing emergency lights or the sound of sirens. I was somewhere else, a place I couldn't explain, a vast and endless void stretching in every direction. First, I thought I was dreaming. But everything around me felt too real, sharper, heavier, almost pressing into me. The air was thick, almost suffocating, like I was underwater but still breathing. There was no ground beneath me, no sky above, just an endless, stretching nothingness in every direction. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was wrong, like something was hiding just beyond my sight, watching me. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if I was frozen in place, trapped by something I couldn't see. My chest tightened, my breath shallow, panic rising in my throat. I opened my mouth to speak, to call out, but no sound came. And that's when I heard it. A whisper, low, faint, and chilling, came from nowhere and everywhere at once, curling around me like a snake. I held my breath, my pulse hammering, my body screaming for me to run, but I couldn't. The whisper was joined by another, then another, overlapping, twisting together into something dark. And just like that, I knew I wasn't alone. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, slithering through the thick air like unseen hands reaching for me. At first, I couldn't make out the words, just a low, eerie murmur circling me. Then, one of the voices cut through the others, sharp and taunting. "You're wasting your time." Another followed, closer this time. "Your prayers don't matter." My stomach dropped as the voices closed in. Each one felt like a dagger, piercing straight into my deepest fears, my doubts, the thoughts I had tried so hard to ignore. "He doesn't hear you. You're alone. You always have been." The weight of their words pressed against my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. I wanted to scream to tell them they were wrong, but deep down I was terrified that they were right. Then the darkness around me began to shift. Shapes emerged, twisted, grotesque figures, pulsing and writhing like living shadows. They weren't fully solid, but their presence was undeniable. I felt their hatred before I could even see their faces, a sickening, oppressive force that wrapped around me like chains. They weren't just here to scare me. They were here for something else. One of the figures moved closer, its form shifting like smoke, but its presence felt heavy, too real to ignore. I wanted to back away, but my body still wouldn't respond. Stopped inches from me, towering over me like a living shadow, its voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You never believed your prayers mattered," it sneered. And you were right. A cold wave of fear washed over me as the words sank deep into my soul. I had struggled with doubt for so long. Had I unknowingly let it consume me? The figure leaned in, its presence suffocating, and whispered the words that shook me to my core. "He doesn't hear you. He never has." My heart pounded as I tried to fight back, but my own doubts, the ones I had buried for years, rose to the surface. What if they were telling the truth? Then, all at once, I understood. This wasn't just fear, this was a deliberate attack. Every missed prayer, every moment of doubt, every time I had questioned God's presence, it hadn't just been my own thoughts. These things had been feeding off of it, whispering, planting seeds of despair, waiting for me to believe the lie. And I had let them in. I had given them power. A sickening realization crept over me. I had spent years believing that my prayers were weak, ineffective, unheard. But that had been the plan all along. These things wanted me to stop praying. They wanted me to believe I was alone, that my words never reached heaven. And I had let them win without even realizing it. The whispers turned to laughter, low, mocking, inhuman. The dark figures pulsed with a twisted energy, growing stronger as my doubt consumed me. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. I felt smaller, weaker, like my very soul was unraveling in their presence. This was it. This was how it ended. Then something inside me pushed back. A single quiet thought, pray. It was barely more than a whisper, but it was there. Pray. My lips trembled as I tried to form the words, but the weight of darkness pressed harder, choking them before they could escape. I had never felt so powerless. But I wasn't going to let them win. With every ounce of strength I had left, I forced my lips to move. My voice was weak, barely above a whisper, but the words came anyway. God, help me. The moment the words left my mouth, everything shifted. The laughter stopped. The figures recoiled, writhing as if something unseen had struck them. The air around me crackled with energy, and for the first time since I arrived in this place, the darkness wasn't closing in, it was pulling away. The swirling mass above the fortress flickered, its power dimming ever so slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. Prayer had power. Even my weakest, most desperate plea had done something. Then, out of nowhere, a light appeared. Brilliant, blinding, unstoppable. It didn't come from me. It came from above, cutting through the void like a blade. I couldn't see its source, but I could feel it. A presence so overwhelming, so powerful that every shadow, every whisper of doubt trembled in its wake. And then a voice. The voice was strong yet filled with immeasurable love, wrapping around me like a warmth I had never known before. Rachel. My name echoed through the space, steady and unwavering. I knew that voice. Every fear, every ounce of doubt that had gripped my soul melted in its presence. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed, trembling, not from fear but from something greater. I didn't need to look up to know who stood before me. It was him. His presence filled every part of me, washing away the weight of the darkness like a tide erasing footprints in the sand. Jesus was here. Tears streamed down my face as the realization sank in. He had heard me. Even in my weakest moment, even when I had doubted, he had never abandoned me. "You have been brought here for a purpose," he said, his voice filled with strength and kindness. "There are truths you must see, truths you must understand. The battle for souls is real, and prayer is the key." His words sent a tremor through me, not out of fear but revelation. I had spent so much of my life wondering if my prayers mattered, and now I was about to see the truth with my own eyes. The darkness around us shrank away, retreating like a shadow before the morning sun. I felt lighter, as if the weight I had been carrying for years had been lifted in an instant. For the first time in so long, I wasn't afraid. Jesus stood before me, his presence radiating a warmth that filled every part of me. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I didn't need to. I knew him. The space around us began to change. The void faded, replaced by something entirely different, a vast, open field bathed in golden light. I turned, my breath catching in my throat as I saw countless people kneeling in prayer. Some prayed boldly, their words strong and filled with faith, their hands raised toward heaven. Others knelt with their heads bowed, whispering barely audible prayers, their faces heavy with doubt and pain. But above them, I saw something incredible. Each prayer, whether whispered in weakness or spoken with confidence, became a beam of light. The strongest ones shot upward like flaming arrows, piercing through the heavens. But even the smallest prayers, the ones spoken through tears, the ones filled with hesitation, still rose. Some flickered, some shined dimly, but none of them disappeared. Every single one reached its destination. I stood frozen, watching in awe as these beams of light connected heaven and earth like an intricate living web. Some of the prayers moved swiftly, cutting through the sky like streaks of fire. Others flickered, struggling against unseen forces that tried to pull them down, but they never disappeared. Even the weakest prayers, those whispered through doubt, exhaustion, or fear, still had power. Every single one was seen. Every single one was heard. Then I saw something that shook me to my core. The fortress. The same dark, towering structure I had seen before, its jagged walls pulsing with an unnatural energy. Prayers were hitting it. Every beam of light, no matter how strong or faint, crashed against the fortress, cracking the stone, weakening its foundation. Below it, shadowy figures, the same ones that had tormented me in the void, screeched and recoiled as the light pierced through their defenses. Jesus turned to me, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "This is what happens when my people pray." My breath caught in my throat as I saw it. Prayer wasn't just words. It was a weapon. Every prayer, no matter how small, no matter how uncertain, pushed back the darkness. I had spent so long believing that my prayers didn't matter, that they weren't strong enough to make a difference. I had never been more wrong. As I stood there, taking in the battle unfolding before me, Jesus gestured toward a single faint beam of light, barely visible, flickering as if it might go out at any moment. Drifted slowly, struggling against the darkness that tried to swallow it. My heart ached watching it fight to rise. Looked so small, so weak. But then it struck the base of the fortress. First, it seemed like nothing happened. The fortress stood tall, unmoving, its dark walls absorbing the tiny impact. But then a crack formed. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it spread. Slowly, steadily, the entire structure began to shake. Pieces of the walls started to crumble, falling away as more prayers crashed into it. Jesus turned to me, his expression filled with both strength and compassion. "That prayer," he said, "was spoken by a mother who didn't believe her words would make a difference. She was tired, overwhelmed, questioning her faith. But she prayed anyway." Tears burned in my eyes as I realized the truth. Prayer isn't about how strong we feel. It's about faith. Even the smallest, weakest prayer could break through the enemy's strongholds. Even when we feel unheard, even when doubt clouds our minds, our prayers still matter. They are still fighting battles we cannot see. And the enemy knows this. That's why he tries so hard to convince us to stop praying. Because when we pray, the darkness trembles. The scene around us shifted again, and suddenly I was no longer looking at the fortress. Instead, I saw a bustling city, full of people going about their daily lives. The sidewalks were crowded, the streets noisy with the sound of cars and conversations. But above them, I could still see the spiritual battle taking place. Demonic figures moved through the air, dragging chains and nets, reaching for prayers before they could rise. Some prayers broke through easily, shining bright and untouchable. Others struggled, weighed down by distraction, doubt, or exhaustion. Then I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. A young boy, no more than 7 years old, knelt beside his bed, his hands folded tightly, his eyes shut. His voice was quiet, barely a whisper. "Jesus, please help my mom and dad." It wasn't an elaborate prayer, not long or filled with fancy words. But the moment he spoke, a beam of light shot from him like an arrow, cutting through every chain in its path. The demonic figures recoiled, their weapons useless against the child's faith. Jesus spoke beside me, his voice filled with love and sorrow. "Faith is the key," he said. "It's not about how many words you speak or how strong you feel. It's about trusting me, even in the smallest ways." I watched in awe as that one simple prayer set things in motion that the boy would never even see. A shift in his family, a moment of grace, a battle won in the unseen realm, all because of one child's faith-filled request. How many times had I failed to believe that my prayers had the same power? My heart was pounding as I took in everything I was seeing. How many prayers had I whispered in desperation, thinking they were too small, too weak to make a difference? How many times had I let doubt convince me that my words weren't reaching heaven? And yet, here I was, witnessing the truth. Even the simplest prayer could change everything. I turned to Jesus, my voice shaking. "What about the prayers that seem unanswered?" I asked. "What about the times we cry out and nothing happens?" His expression softened, and with a wave of his hand, the scene shifted again. This time, I saw a man kneeling in his bedroom, his hands gripping the sides of his bed as he prayed through tears. Behind him, a battle raged. Angels clashed with demonic forces, their swords striking against the darkness. The man couldn't see it, had no idea what was happening, but his prayers were giving the angels strength, driving back the enemy with every word. "Some battles take time," Jesus said. "You may not always see the results of your prayers immediately, but they are always heard. They are always working." Tears streamed down my face. How many people had given up, thinking their prayers had been ignored, when in reality they were fueling victories they couldn't yet see? How many times had I almost given up myself? I stared at the battle unfolding before me, my heart aching for all the times I had thought my prayers were in vain. How many times had I walked away too soon, not knowing that heaven was already moving? The man in the vision had no idea that his words were strengthening angels, that his prayer was pushing back the darkness. And yet there he was, crying out to God, completely unaware that his faith was already shifting things in the spiritual realm. Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. "Sarah, pray." His words were simple, but they carried immeasurable power. Prayer is not just a practice, it is a partnership. It is how you invite me to move, how you bring heaven to earth. Never doubt its power and never stop praying, no matter how you feel. The weight of his words settled deep in my soul. I had spent years praying out of obligation, out of routine, but now I understood. Prayer wasn't just something I did. It was a weapon, a force that shifted things in ways I could never imagine. As I knelt before him, overwhelmed by everything I had seen, I made a vow. I would never again take prayer for granted. I would pray not because I always felt strong, but because I knew that he was. And I would share this truth with anyone who would listen. Prayer changes everything. The light around us grew brighter, and for the first time since I had arrived in this place, I felt true peace. The weight of my doubts, my fears, my failures, all of it had lifted. I had spent so long believing my prayers were weak, insignificant, unheard. But now I knew the truth. Every single prayer matters. But even as I soaked in that peace, a stirring deep inside me told me this moment wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Jesus looked at me, his expression both gentle and resolute. "Sarah," he said, "what you have seen is not for you alone." A lump formed in my throat as he continued. "Many of my people are struggling as you did, distracted, discouraged, doubting that their prayers matter. You will be sent back to show them the truth." My heart pounded. I wasn't sure I was strong enough for this. Through seeing the reality of spiritual warfare, the weight of prayer's importance, I felt small, unworthy, unqualified. But before the fear could take hold, Jesus spoke again, his words settling deep into my soul. "Do not be afraid. You will not be alone. My Spirit will guide you, give you strength, and remind you of what you have seen here." I swallowed hard, trying to process what he was telling me. I was going back. Back to my life, back to the world I had left behind. But I wasn't the same person who had prayed out of routine, who had doubted the power of her own words. I had seen the truth. And now I had a mission to tell others, to help them see what I had seen. But what if they don't listen? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What if they're too discouraged, too distracted to believe me? Jesus looked at me with infinite patience, as if he had heard this question 1,000,000 times before. "That is not for you to carry," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Your job is to speak the truth and live it out. The rest is in my hands." The space around us began to shift again, and suddenly I saw a vision, myself standing before a crowd sharing this very story. First, the faces were skeptical, their expressions guarded. But as I spoke, I watched as their hearts softened, their eyes filled with tears. Some would believe, some wouldn't, but every seed planted mattered. Even if I never saw the fruit, I had to trust that my obedience would bring results in God's time. I took a deep breath, feeling both the weight and the privilege of what I had been called to do. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about how well I could explain what I had seen or whether people would believe me. It was about him, his truth, his power, and my willingness to trust that even the smallest act of obedience could be used for something far greater than I could imagine. Jesus extended his hand toward me, and the light surrounding us seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "When you return," he said, "remember these truths. Pray without ceasing, even when it feels futile. Encourage others to pray, even when they feel weak. Trust in my power, even when you cannot see the results. The battle is real, but the victory is already mine." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded, my heart pounding. "I'll do it," I whispered. "I'll share what you've shown me." Jesus smiled, and the light around us grew blindingly bright. I felt a pull, like something was calling me back, and before I could say another word, the warmth of his presence began to fade. My body felt heavy, my spirit being drawn downward, back to the world I had left behind. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was his voice, steady, full of love, full of promise. "Go, Sarah. Your mission begins now." I gasped as my eyes flew open. Bright hospital lights burned into my vision, the distant beeping of machines filling my ears. My chest rose and fell rapidly, my body trembling, weak, but I was alive. Nurses and doctors surrounded me, their eyes wide with shock. They hadn't expected me to wake up. But I had, and I knew why. Tears blurred my vision as memories of what I had seen flooded back. The void, the whispers, the fortress, the battle, and most of all, Jesus. His words still echoed in my heart, filling me with a renewed strength that had nothing to do with my body. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about fulfilling the mission he had given me. To pray, to fight, to tell others. In the days that followed, I began to share my story. First, it was just with family. Some believed me, some didn't. But I didn't let their doubt discourage me. I prayed for them anyway. I prayed differently now, boldly, with faith, without fear. And as I spoke, something incredible happened. People who had given up on prayer started praying again. Broken hearts began to heal. Chains began to break. The darkness didn't go away. It fought back harder than ever. But I wasn't afraid anymore, 'cause now I knew the truth. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever felt like your prayers don't matter, I need you to know this. They do. No matter how small, no matter how weak they feel, your prayers are powerful. They are pushing back darkness. They are being heard. If you've been struggling with doubt, I encourage you, start praying again. Comment below if you've ever had a moment where God reminded you that He was listening. Let's share our experiences and encourage one another. And if you want to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. 'Cause trust me, this is just the beginning. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.